What's up everybody, Liam Clisham here for another Houdini and Redshift tutorial, really kind of a quick tip and response video. So the other day, I guess on April 11th, MographPlus put out this cool video of comparing a MoGraph setup inside of Houdini and Cinema 4D and which one is better. Which one is better doesn't actually get answered. They just leave that up to the community, which I think is great. You all can decide which one you think is easier to work in. However, with that said, I found that there were quite a few little things that they did inside of Houdini that could have been optimized and quicker. So I wanted to make a response and just throw some quick tips at everyone so they can maybe lean towards Houdini a little bit more, or realize that like they both are pretty equal in speed and setup. And what they explain in the video too is, as long as you know what you're doing, and that's the caveat, is things inside of Cinema 4D will take longer if you're new to Cinema 4D, and things will take longer in Houdini if you're new to Houdini, because you have to learn those things. But I wanted to give a little bit more edge to Houdini by showing a few little quick tips of how we can get this same look with a few less steps and consolidating some things. So if you do want to check out this video, it will be in the description below. And if you want to jump to the Houdini part, it starts right around, like say 11 minutes. Yeah, right around 11 minutes. And you can find the setup that I've built too. So inside of Houdini, I've actually got the exact same setup that they end up doing, maybe a slight variation of it, just putting my own spin on it, but pretty much the same thing. And I'm just gonna break that down into these three cool little quick tips of how you can make this work a little bit easier and consolidated, so there's not so many nodes. The one thing in particular is just how many group nodes they have, how many copy to points that they ended up with, and making that workflow a little bit simpler. Also, towards the end, they export a black and white option to multiply inside of Arnold. I think that's what they're using, and they didn't need to do that either. They could have just kept that in this single stream here. So let's talk about this a little bit. The one thing that I want to point out that I learned from the video is this cool masking from geometry feature. I didn't know that existed, and I've always been an attribute transfer type person, and this just makes way more sense than using an attribute transfer. Plus you get the remap features in here. It's awesome. So thank you so much, MographPlus, for that. That's amazing. I wish I'd known of that before. So the first thing I want to talk about is this copy variant. Inside of the video, maybe I can find it really quick. They end up using multiple copies. Let's see, just trying to see here. And I'm not exactly sure where it is in the video, but they end up using multiple copies, and that's not necessary the way Houdini 18 is built for copying. You can actually just do it with a couple of variables very quickly. So if you've gotten to the point that you've completed the video and you're trying to optimize the way that I have, all I've done is just isolate a few things. So we've got this grid here, and just throwing an add and changing it to delete geometry and keep the points, just like they do in the MographPlus tutorial. But there is one cool new thing that they don't point out about copy to points, and there's this piece attribute that allows you to vary the objects that are scattered down here. So the way that works is you have to have a variant, and you can name it whatever you want, any kind of attribute, but I've just kept it simple because this is the default variant. You have to have a variant attribute on both incoming streams. So they have to be applied to the points ahead of time over here, and then they also have to be applied to both of these. And you could manually do it by throwing an attribute create on each object, which would be super time consuming, or you can throw them all into a merge and just throw a connectivity SOP down, set it to primitive, and then put variant, and that's all you need to do. And then we come in here, let me turn off this. You might see that all it's doing is pulling the number 1 So this is 0 and this is 1. If you look at your geometry spreadsheet, we've got 0 and 1 in here that's representing each of these. And the way you get that kind of randomized look is an attribute randomize, and pipe that in here and put variant. Make sure you're set to points and multiply. And I've done a couple extra steps that I just do it for tidy reasons, is set this to uniform discrete. And right now we're only using 2 objects. So our minimum value needs to be 0 for object 0 right here. And our maximum value needs to be our max, which is 1. And then we step it by 1 here. And that's how we get that variation. It creates kind of like a black and white pattern along here and lets it know to put the cube anytime there's a 1 and a tube anytime there's a 0. So that's really handy, and you can also add in more objects and just change your parameters a little bit and go with it, and it makes it so you don't have to keep adding more copy points. You can just keep it to nice clean 2 stream inputs. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this next one. One of the other things that they do is they use multiple groups, which you definitely don't need to do. You can keep it all inside of one contained group. So same thing, we've got a grid here, and then we've got this add, and then we've got this group. So for this, I'm just going to delete this out of here. We've got our box, and we're selecting 1 of 2, just like we do in the MographPlus video. And then we can just add in another group, and I'm going to call it tubes, like that. Change it to points, do 1 of 2 as well, but we want to shift it by 1, so we're actually selecting this column here. I'm going to do that. You'll see it doesn't actually update, and that's because this box group is taking precedence over everything. So if we untick that, you'll see this group is actually there. This just overrides that visible queue to the viewport. So again, uncheck it, we see that our tubes are there, turn it back on, and there we go. And so then we can do attribute creates for each one of our objects. So right now I've got box, and it's going to be set to 0, which I'm going to change that over here, just change this order. I know I could have done it below. Yeah, I'll actually do that below. Just hit Shift R, and then I'll move these over. That way I have my box in the right spot. So box is 0, and then for tube, if we look at this one here, under tubes, variant, we have it set to 1 to be 1. And if we turn this on, we now have our columns. What if we want to add in another one? What I was just talking about. So I've got this tube that I've actually just turned into a pyramid here, and I'm going to pipe that in there, come into our group, and let's make one called pyramid. And what we need to do is set it to point. And again, we'll do 1 for 3, 1 for 3, 1 for 3, and we'll offset this by 2. Again, box is 0, tubes are 1, pyramids are now 2. And come down here, we need to add another attribute variant, which I've already created, and you'll see that the value is set to 2. If we turn this back on, we now have every third object being replaced. The way this is set up is it starts with 3 and then goes 0, 1, 2, and I guess not 3, but actually 2 here. So don't be confused by that. That's just how the group selection works. It shifted everything a little bit. But the other nice thing that we can do now is add an attribute randomize, and we could have done this with just 2 as well. I found it to be a little bit easier to visualize with 3 objects though. So if we have an attribute randomize, and we're going to do the same thing, we're going to select from 0 to 2, and then have a step value of 1, just to reiterate the point, 0 being our box, 1 being our tube, and 2 being our tube / pyramid. Then when we turn this back on, you'll now see we got this randomization, and we can just do global seed, find whatever we want. Now we get that nice randomization, all just keeping it in a nice, clean, simple stream here. Now, something else that was really cool, and this doesn't really have to do with a single stream, but just something cool about using the mask from geometry that I wanted to point out. So I guess this is quick tip number 3 out of all of this, is you can set this to any float value, I found out. So you can set it to mask, you can set it to whatever you want, but if you set it to something like p-scale or any other float value that Houdini recognizes, it'll actually transfer that value, and you'll see it's now p-scale down here. If you type in scale, because that's a vector, it doesn't work. Even though it shows up here, it doesn't actually work. Or if you type in like, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. Scale is the only thing I'm thinking of right now, so we'll just leave it at that. But it has to be a float value to work. So again, if we do p-scale, which is a float, then you can start manipulating things, and you'll see it's changing in there. If I click off, we get that fade off that we get in the other video. So really cool tip there too. If you know that you just need to do what I generally do for an attribute transfer, but as a p-scale, you can just use this cool mask from geometry and make a p-scale. So let's go back into this full setup here. I want to talk about a couple other things and just kind of getting it set to render inside of Redshift, inside of Houdini. In the other video, they export it to an Alembic and bring it back into Cinema 4D, and we don't need to do all that. We can just stay inside of Houdini. So I'm going to break this down again. So if we start from the top, I've got this. Let me turn that off. There we go. You can kind of see in here, it's a little bit hard, but I've got my mask from geometry that I've just set as mask, and you can kind of see it in there. And I've got my ramp set however I want. And then in here for some consolidation, I think going into VOPs is really great. I use it all the time because I think visually, but most of what we're doing can just be handled through Vex. Really, really simple Vex. So what I've done is only just some like attribute manipulation. So in the video, you're going into VOPs and you're binding a p-scale and setting it to the mask attribute. Really simple Vex is saying, hey, take a p-scale value and make it a mask, or make it equal the mask value. Really that simple. P-scale equals mask. Like that. It's that easy. So next, they do the scale and scale it on Y. So we have to do a little bit more work for that. If you do the scale value, you need to set the scale before it works properly, because otherwise it's just going to scale everything down and not work properly. So what I've done here is we have set our scale value, and we use these brackets here because it's a vector, and so we have scale with our x being 1, our baseline y being 1, and our baseline z being 1 as well. So this is saying set the scale attribute to 1 on x scale, 1 on y scale, and 1 on z scale. And then below that, we can actually multiply this now base value that we've set against the mask, and then also control the y height. So to break this down, we're isolating the scale on y here, multiplying it against itself. So when you see star equals, that means take this attribute, multiply it against itself, or these values against itself here. So everything that comes after the equal sign, go ahead and multiply it back on this. So inside a VOP, it's doing the same thing that you'll see in the MographPlus tutorial of taking that bind and multiplying it with the mask. And then that, I believe they use a constant value. But this is just a little bit more straightforward to say, take the scale x, and then everything comes after the equal sign, multiply it against that scale y. I think I just said scale x, scale y. And I know I'm repeating myself a lot here, but I'm doing it because people get very afraid of Houdini at times, and I just want to be clear and show that like it's pretty simple once you start to learn some of these things. So what we've got here, scale y, multiply with the mask, but then also give us a baseline value to create the height here. So I'm going to go ahead and start turning off some of these things. Don't need that. And don't need that. I can turn off the randomize, and I think that's good. So right now, you can see that we've got this ramp, and as it feathers out, these values go down, which is exactly what we want, and we have these height here. If I come in here and adjust the Y height like I've done, then we can have our multiply always be multiplying times 5. So 1 times 5 right there. And I guess I should do the service of showing how I created this ramp. If you ever want to create a ramp in Vex inside of Wrangle, you can type ch and then whatever you want to call it. Let's call it, we'll just use my name, Liam, and close it off and go ahead and star that so it multiplies. And then you hit this little button over here and it creates that value. So now we're multiplying 5 here, but then we also have this multiplying as well, times 2. So we're actually getting 10 right there. And then we can clear this out, just reset it back to normal. If you ever want to clear out these extra parameters, like that, if you ever want to clear these out, you can go in here and do delete all spare parameters, click this button again, and it resets it to however you want. Yeah, so do that, set like that. And what else was I going to show you? Got the randomize, which we already talked about, so we can turn that back on, and you can see we've got a little bit more randomization there. It's not just columns, but we've got randomized columns and rows in there. We've got our color here. That's what I wanted to show you. So I've got just this nice color, and if you follow the tutorial, you'll learn how to set up this ramp. But basically we've got ramp from attribute, pulling it from the mask, and I've got 3 values here, this purplish one, pinkish one, and then this blue tone there. Inside the video, they make a separate attribute to use inside of Arnold to multiply and get more variation in these tones here. That's really not necessary. You can actually do kind of what we're doing up here with this attribute randomize of a variation, or that variant attribute, and just apply it to color. So what I've done is I've got color piped in here, multiply, and then you can make it whatever you want, but I made it black and white values by changing the dimensions down to 1, our minimum value 0, so black, our maximum value 1, and then step right there. And if I turn this on, you'll see it now multiplies against this and gives us some more variation in there. And that's it. So the next step for rendering, pretty straightforward. The only thing that we're going to be pulling in is this color attribute. So I'm going to go ahead, go over to my render view here. I've already got a camera set up and a dome light right in there and camera there. And I'm going to go ahead and go into my quad layout. If you haven't set up a quad layout, it is by far my favorite way to work. That way you can have multiple panels going on. We've got this linked to here and this linked to here. If you want to learn more about that and really get a sense of Houdini, totally check out the Stop Being Afraid of Houdini course by Mark Fancher on MographPlus.com. It'll get you set up and loving a quad layout immediately. It's great. So we've got this Redshift ROP here, and I'm going to go into materials, and I'm pretty certain somebody's mowing their lawn, so I'm sorry if that's coming through. And I've got this color that I've made, and simple enough, we've got this material going out to the surface. We need to look up this attribute. So we did a Redshift point attribute, pipe in the color, and that's it. It'll pull in the color data, and we've got it going into Redshift. So if I hit play right now and turn off bucket rendering, make sure go into my cam and make sure that's coming through. Is it because I turned off my light? It's because I turned off my light. There we go. And that's it. And if I move my cam around, come out of this, I'll just go into auto so we can see what's going on. Oh, it's not taking it. All right, I'll go back to my camera, whatever. There we go. Move around. You can see we've got everything that we have in our viewport coming through here. And if I go back into my full setup, come over to this transform and move it around, there we go. And it all transfers really easily. And sorry for the depth of field. I had depth of field turned on, so it's all blurry there. So yeah, it's kind of a longer video, but those are just some quick tips on how you can take everything and keep it into a single stream and render it straight inside Redshift. Nice and simple and consolidated, not having all these extra nodes everywhere. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, etc., go ahead and leave a comment below. If you like what I'm doing here, please hit subscribe and like and all that jazz that every YouTuber tells everybody. And if you want to find me anywhere, go ahead and do a quick search for 531. You'll find me, Liam Clisham, pretty much everywhere on social media and my website at 531. As always, thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.